Kane Pixel's Backrooms series has always been one of the most interesting things within the modern internet horror landscape. Compared to many of the other series that I covered, I can remember immediately thinking that Kane definitely was going to go places because of just the raw talent that was shown in his earlier videos. So that's why when I heard that Kane would actually be directing his own A24 interpretation of the Backrooms, I couldn't lie and say my interest wasn't piqued. However, I always try to look at things with a grain of salt, but when I saw just how good the lineup was from top to bottom within the film, I have to say that I'm pretty hopeful. But is this film actually any good? Well, I got opening night tickets, so hopefully I won't be let down.
One eternity later.
Holy shit, that was everything I was hoping it was, and I don't say that lightly. It was everything a Backrooms film should be, as it nearly perfectly translated the feelings that came from the original shorts into the film. Now don't get me wrong, the movie isn't perfect, and there are some aspects that do still show that Kane has some room to grow. But I think for a freshman film, Kane absolutely gives what was expected out of a Backrooms film, if not more. However, before getting into my thoughts on the film, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for twice a month uploads on anything internet horror related. Also some mild spoilers ahead, however I will keep them to the barest minimum possible. Thanks for listening and let's begin. The first aspect of the film that really stood out to me was how effectively it used its atmosphere whenever it was directly needed. None of the atmosphere felt forced, but rather naturally came along with the creepy worlds that the characters found themselves lost within. It honestly reminded me of Kane's other works such as The Oldest View, as those both use empty spaces and really have his perfected sound design. For example, all of the sequences where a character is just dropped into and explores the backrooms have this incredible atmospheric tension, as the backrooms are foreign to both us and the characters. Usually a lot of horror movies will reveal the threat a little bit before the characters fully realize what's going on, but I think this film does the opposite throughout. Instead, we are forced to witness these things when the characters do, and it gives the film an objective perspective throughout. I point this out because this shows the film was able to achieve something that very few films I have seen actually pull off, which was creating a truly Lovecraftian experience. Throughout the runtime, everything comes from such an objective place that it feels like this is just how things happened and there is really nothing the characters can do about it. We're just as lost as the characters are throughout, and nothing in this world is going to help us figure out what is truly happening here, as there really isn't an answer that we can fully comprehend. The spaces are familiar but also unexplainable in their own way. The sound design also adds this layer of emptiness throughout the film, as we feel our characters truly get lost within the maze. This works perfectly with the cinematography by Jeremy Cox, previously of Oz Perkins' work, as the slow camera movements and framing really emphasize the liminality of the spaces. It honestly was one of the reasons I was hyped for the film when I saw that he was attached, because the cinematography in Longlegs was by far one of its standouts, and also just felt like it would perfectly fit for the type of film the Backrooms would feel like. And this decision pays off masterfully, as I don't think I was visually bored throughout the entire film. Is there a lot of center framing within the film? Yes, but it does so in a way that adds to the uncanny nature of the film. We get a lot of close-ups that create a tension and trapping feeling within the backrooms itself, and then the long dolly tracking shots really make the space feel much bigger than it most likely was. It was genuinely startling at times just how much Kane and Cox captured the feeling of his fully CGI series in practical sets, because many of this look absolutely fantastic. Speaking of, the set design in this film was absolutely out of this world, which is why I was so hyped upon seeing the first trailer. They somehow made the backrooms feel like an otherworldly place, but still feel completely real at the same time, and when reading about the making of the film, it's easy to see how. They actually built over 30,000 square feet of backrooms for the film, which really shows off in the finished product. As you can tell, the characters are in a real space. Many films now suffer from the very obviously shot on green screen look, but the Backrooms doesn't suffer from this despite being a more mainstream release. This makes the film more intense throughout, and every time a character enters the space, every single cue in the film changes. It almost gives the film itself an uncanny feel, as the cinematography makes you begin to question what is actually in the Backrooms and what is in reality by the end of it. These come together into some amazing sequences throughout the film, with the highlight being the main turning point in the middle, as the entire sequence left me on the edge of my seat. I saw it with friends, and the sequence had many of them spook, so if you are looking for an intense horror experience, then this movie will definitely be for you. However, none of the scares felt too jump scare heavy, and I would say that if you're relatively unsure about it because of that fear, I would say to check it out anyways. The ones that are in there are relatively easy to predict, as the atmosphere naturally leads to them rather than having them come across as forced. That's how I would describe a lot of this film, and would specifically say the film goes for a natural surrealism throughout, as while not everything gets explained and leaves the world feeling bizarre, it still all flows in a natural natural narrative way. The movie succeeds because every filmmaking element is working to the same feeling of disorientation and incomprehensibility. However, this gets into one of the small issues that I have with the film, which is the writing on some occasions. Some points of the film work much better than the others, and a lot of the best scenes in the film involve no dialogue at all. But the more dialogue-heavy scenes were somewhat hit or miss, as the weird surrealist atmosphere didn't really always flow well with the extremely flat roles the characters have. And I don't say flat as an insult. Honestly, I would say that a lot of the flatness of the acting actually works in its favor, as it adds this slightly unsettling and uncanny feeling throughout, giving nearly every scene this feeling of being just slightly off. But I think sometimes the dialogue gets a bit too weird and vague for its own good, so it can come across a bit pretentious at times. The worst of this is by far the last 3 minutes of the film, and it was no surprise to me that a sequel of the film was already announced. But it does somewhat bother me, as it hampers the singularity of this film a bit, knowing that it was kind of a setup for a sequel. However, despite my ragging on some of the dialogue, the performances here are surprisingly good, as it has an almost Hollywood feel to it that many other A24 films don't always go for. A lot of the acting felt much more like something you would see in an older horror film, as parts of it are just a bit over the top while still having that dark edge when the film really needs to be. Chai Wittel is the standout of the film as usual, but Renate also does a good job here as the two lead roles. It's not the best acting in the world, and it's definitely not Oscar worthy, don't get me wrong, but you can tell they were really feeling this while making it. But because of this, I somewhat want to get into the backlash surrounding this film, as many people are getting angry at the film for not following the lore on the Backrooms Wikipedia. And while I understand that to some, this feels like Kane turning his back on the community. I just don't get that read at all, and made perfect sense from a directorial standpoint. Kane took the core original concept and threw his own little tiny spin on it, and while it would have been cool to see slightly different spaces, I don't think it would have been entirely necessary for the story in the first place. Remember, when writing a film, you should only keep what's absolutely necessary in it to not waste the audience's time. Also, some people need to realize that this is a film, not one of Kane Pixel's entirely CGI works. So the cost of the building of those sets, as Kane did for the entirety of this movie, would just be astronomically expensive. And I've heard this complaint supposedly being justified by people's opinion on the ending, which is purposely vague and out of left field. And a lot of people felt that if he had gone for the more layer-based approach, then the film would have been much more about exploration rather than searching for a way out of one's problems. And I think that honestly, it wouldn't have worked if they had done that, because in this current version, the characters all have something they are dealing with from their past. And you can tell that they all see the Backrooms as a way to push that stuff behind them and move on. And while the grief metaphor is a bit commonplace now, it does so in a way that feels deserved for the characters rather than to have some sort of deeper subtext. Everyone is struggling with something, and this movie does a good job of making its characters face that head on. Speaking of, the movie has a ton of setups and payoff, something that feels like it should be commonplace now but really isn't. Nearly every major aspect of the film that is set up comes back in some sort of way, which gives the film an overall very satisfying feeling throughout. That honestly bites it in the end with such a purposely vague ending, but I still enjoy the questions that the film leaves you with. However, while they could have answered every question, they purposely leave some ambiguous, and that was honestly my favorite aspect of it. It could have easily pulled a Longlegs where it explained everything in the last 30 minutes, but instead respected its audience to just experience the mayhem. And that honestly is what makes the Backrooms work as a concept. So for the film to be able to capture it is truly magnificent to see, and honestly, it is one of the few films I've seen that recently meet my expectations. So with all that being said, when looking at this film, nearly everything about it works from beginning to end. And while some moments definitely taper it down from giving it a super high score, I gotta say it by far exceeded my expectations. I would honestly highly recommend seeing this in theaters, as I got a showing with laser, so the colors and cinematography were just absolutely spectacular. And the wonderful atmosphere makes this film a pretty easy film for me to score, which is a solid 8 out of 10. I thoroughly enjoyed this film, and it makes me want to see Obsession quite badly, as I've heard that one is even better. It's kind of been wonderful to see, since it's been a while since I've talked on this channel, but horror has been doing extremely well the past couple years. As I can tell, we are entering what seems to be a new phase of horror within cinema, which has a lot more direct roots to internet horror than before. Here's to hoping they don't make a Jeff the Killer film. Oh, what am I kidding? Of course they will. And before closing this all out, I wanted to say thank you guys all for watching. I promise this time I'll get back to my more normal schedule. I spent a lot of time working on things in myself the past 2 months, and I plan to make somewhat more ambitious stuff here soon. And finally, if you guys haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments down below what your favorite horror movie of the year has been so far. We've had a lot of heavy hitters, so I'm really excited to see what you guys all think. And I'll see you all soon.